One of the major points of discussion during the recently concluded 8th CARICOM-Cuba summit was the common threat of climate change. This region is among those suffering the brunt of the climate fallout fueled by historic industrialization by richer nations. Cuba is urging the Caribbean community towards closer cooperation to solidify the region's response to the climate crisis. During the summit's opening ceremony, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel, speaking through a translator, reiterated the country's past commitment and now in the present and future to finding ways to improve mitigation and adaptation efforts to address climate change in the Caribbean.
Dear heads of delegation, in recent years, we have witnessed a considerable increase in the effects of climate change and natural disasters, particularly in small island developing states, where the intensification of extreme weather events is obvious and almost irreversible. Droughts, hurricanes, the deterioration of soils, and other environmental issues, as well as sargassum and the rise in temperatures. In the 6th Cuba CARICOM Summit, we signed the agreement between the Civil Defense of Cuba and the Caribbean Disaster Management Agency. And this has made it possible to expand and to integrate early warning systems in our region. Because of this, in recent years, many specialists in the region have been trained in our country in the management of response to natural disasters, and we've also had the participation of the Cuban scientific community and UNESCO. We've also provided training for fire officers.
To propel sustainable development, Cuba is proposing hosting a workshop on disaster risk management and climate change adaptation, especially via early warning systems. Further, Cuba has volunteered to offer experience-based training on constructing regional projects through its environmental agency. Some key proposals include a project to restore sandy beaches, another to embark on preserving the coral reefs, and a low-carbon and resilient tourism cooperation agreement. Recovery of sandy beaches is already underway, with funding provided by South Korea through the Association of Caribbean States. Trinidad and Tobago and Antigua and Barbuda were the first to benefit, with project implementation in those two countries already completed. The Low Carbon and Resilient Tourism Cooperation Drive will be presented to the Green Climate Fund once Cuba and CARICOM can settle on a project of mutual benefit. Meanwhile, the Cuban government says it is actively seeking funding to underwrite projects geared towards the preservation of coral reefs in the Caribbean, some of the most vulnerable in the world to the ravages of climate change. At the opening ceremony earlier this month, the Cuban president also issued a special thank you to the CARICOM member states for their equal show of support to Cuba in unprecedented times.
I want to thank you once again for your support during the COVID-19 pandemic and after the sad natural disasters and events which have affected our country this year and which have led to loss of human lives and huge material damage. The resources that have been placed at our disposal by the Caribbean countries have provided material, have fed us spiritually, and therefore we want to thank you once again for your support. And we want to thank you also for your calls for the end of the illegal and unfair economic embargo. We also thank you for condemning the unilateral inclusion of Cuba in the illegitimate list of countries that sponsor terrorism.